1995 meeting in Beverly Hills in the home of Clyde Davis, and there were rappers there from all over the country. They were invited to the home of Clyde Davis, along with members of the CIA, FBI, which they didn't understand why the government was there.
This is hot. Say that. Do this. We're going to have this guy write the lyrics. We're going to have that. So the narrative is really kind of...
What if everything you've been told about rap culture isn't organic at all, but something carefully shaped behind the scenes? What if the themes you hear in song after song weren't just personal stories, but part of a much bigger agenda? The artists you thought were simply reflecting their environment might actually be playing a role that was built for them, whether they realize it or not. The idea here is simple but unsettling. What if the image of the street rapper, the lifestyle, the lyrics, even the attitude wasn't just culture evolving naturally, but something designed and amplified to push a specific narrative? Because once that narrative spreads, it doesn't just stay in music, it starts influencing behavior, identity, and how an entire generation sees success and reality. For years, stories about a behind-the-scenes meeting that shaped the direction of hip-hop have been dismissed as conspiracy or exaggeration. But that's where things start to get interesting. Because some believe there are patterns, decisions, and outcomes that don't look random at all. And when you start connecting those dots, certain artists and trends begin to look less like coincidence and more like part of a larger system. Today, we're breaking down that theory and asking a serious question. Was hip-hop guided, or was it engineered from the start?
If you haven't subscribed yet, fix that right now. This is IconicTrey, and things are about to get crazy.
By the end of this video, you're gonna look at hip-hop very differently. Because once you see the bigger picture, it's hard to unsee it. By the 1990s, hip-hop wasn't just growing, it was on the edge of completely taking over. What started as something many dismissed as temporary or underground had already begun breaking into the mainstream in a serious way. Then it exploded. Artists like Tupac, Biggie, and Snoop Dogg didn't just make music, they turned hip-hop into a global force. Their success pushed the genre into every corner of pop culture, from radio to television to international markets. At that point, everything changed. Record labels that once ignored hip-hop suddenly couldn't move fast enough to sign artists. It wasn't just about music anymore. It was about influence, money, and control. And that's where the story starts to take a very different turn. But what if that explosion wasn't as organic as it looked? What if hip-hop didn't just rise because millions of people suddenly connected with it, but because something bigger was pushing it forward behind the scenes? That's where this theory starts. The idea that hip-hop, especially in its early mainstream phase, may have been steered in a very specific direction.
And yeah, at first, it sounds extreme. But this isn't some brand new idea that just appeared out of nowhere.
This narrative has been floating around the industry for years, gaining attention every time new pieces of information surface. It really took off in 2012, when an anonymous letter hit the internet, allegedly written by someone high up in the music business. And this wasn't vague or speculative. The letter made direct claims about how the industry operates, claims that people are still arguing about to this day. According to that anonymous writer, everything traces back to a secret meeting in the early 90s, one that allegedly brought together powerful record executives and high-level businessmen. The claim is that this wasn't just a discussion about music, it was a strategy session with a very specific goal in mind. The writer even said they were present, describing how the direction of hip-hop was deliberately shifted from that point forward. The core of the claim is this: executives were pushed to prioritize signing artists who fit a gangster image, not randomly, but as part of a focused approach. The idea was to elevate that archetype and make it dominant, turning it into the face of the genre. And once that image became mainstream, it wouldn't just stay in music, it would influence the audience watching it. According to the letter, the goal wasn't just entertainment, it was about shaping perception, making a certain lifestyle look powerful, appealing, and worth imitating. According to the letter, the motive behind all of this wasn't cultural, it was financial. The claim is that some of the businessmen involved had major investments tied to the private prison industry, and in that context, the strategy takes on a completely different meaning. The idea being that promoting a certain lifestyle could lead to real-world consequences, and those consequences could translate directly into profit.
Now, to be clear, this story has never been officially confirmed by mainstream sources.
It's been debated for years, with some artists and insiders saying there's truth to it, while others completely dismiss it as fiction. That divide is exactly what has kept the theory alive for so long. But recently, another voice entered the conversation and added a new layer. Syndicated radio host Larry Gators claimed the meeting did happen, and according to him, the anonymous letter didn't even tell the full story. He suggests there's more behind it, details that push this theory even further than people initially thought. Larry didn't just repeat the story, he took it a step further and put a name behind it. According to him, the person allegedly at the center of this entire operation was Clive Davis, a legendary figure in the music industry. He claims that this wasn't some distant rumor either, but that the meeting actually took place at Davis's own home in Beverly Hills. That's a serious accusation because it shifts the story from a vague theory to something much more specific. Larry's claim is that Davis wasn't just present, he was a key figure in driving this change, helping shape the direction of hip-hop at a critical moment in its rise.
1995 meeting in Beverly Hills in the home of Clyde Davis. And there were rappers there from all over the country. They were invited to the home of Clyde Davis, along with members of the CIA, FBI, which they didn't understand why the government was there, including many directors and CEOs of the private prisons throughout the United States was at that meeting in the mansion of Clyde Davis. And they were telling these rappers, you need to create songs talking about killing police, calling black women bees and hoes. You need to get more nasty so we can fill our prisons that we're building. Okay.
You know what's crazy during that time? I can recall when that gangster music came into play.
That's it.
And how they, you know, I don't know if the guys rapping it really knew, but they created the atmosphere.
Yes.
But it went from, I remember guys wanting to wear like the African chains around their neck,
yes,
dancing and the haircuts, flat tops, kid and play,
Kwame,
yeah, to the really thugged out and
yes,
just the gang stuff. And I can recall going into like liquor stores or different places and all they had was blue and red rags.
Right.
It was just like that stuff was on program.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you might be wondering how Clive Davis could even be connected to something like a gangster rap meeting in the early 90s, especially since he wasn't publicly known for working with rappers at that time. On the surface, it doesn't seem to line up, but that's exactly where things start to get more interesting. Because once you look a little closer at his influence in the industry, the picture changes. While most people associate Davis with major artists like Whitney Houston, his role behind the scenes went far beyond just one genre. And according to this perspective, that reach may have expanded into shaping how hip-hop was packaged and pushed into the mainstream at a critical moment. The argument goes even further, claiming that Clive Davis wasn't just influential, but played a key behind-the-scenes role in pushing hip-hop into the mainstream through Bad Boy Records. According to this view, his involvement wasn't widely visible, but it was significant in shaping how the label operated and grew. And that's where the connection to this larger theory starts to tighten.
At the center of it is Sean Combs. After being pushed out of Uptown Records by Andre Harrell, he had already signed Biggie Smalls, but didn't have the backing to take things to the next level.
That moment could have stalled everything. Instead, he quickly secured a major deal with Arista Records, which was led by Davis at the time. That shift changed everything. What looked like a setback turned into a launchpad. And from there, Bad Boy didn't just survive, it exploded into one of the most dominant forces in hip-hop. And for those who believe in this theory, that timing raises questions about how much of it was chance and how much of it was positioned behind the scenes. Rumors around that deal go even further, suggesting that Puff may have had to go to unusual lengths to secure it, though none of that has ever been confirmed publicly. What is clear is that many people credit Clive Davis as a major force in shaping Sean Combs into the figure he eventually became. And that influence is where a lot of these theories start to connect. The official story is much simpler. Puff reportedly convinced Davis that hip-hop was about to become a global force and that Arista needed to move early to capitalize on it. At first, there was hesitation, which makes what happened next stand out even more. Because despite limited proof at that point, Puff walked away with a $15 million deal to launch Bad Boy Records. That kind of investment wasn't common, especially for someone still building their track record. And that's exactly why people still question how that deal came together in the first place. Back in the 90s, that $15 million deal was massive, the equivalent of nearly $38 million today, and that's what makes it stand out. Because the real question is simple: what investor takes that kind of risk on someone who hadn't fully proven themselves yet? But once Sean Combs got that backing, everything moved fast. He took that funding and built Bad Boy into a powerhouse, and by the time Biggie's era peaked, he wasn't just an executive, he was the face of a growing empire. And that moment didn't just elevate one label, it helped shift hip-hop into a fully commercial corporate machine that still defines the industry today. If Clive Davis hadn't backed Sean Combs at that exact moment, there's a real argument that hip-hop might not have scaled the way it did. But what makes this even more interesting is the timing. Because according to the anonymous letter, that alleged meeting that shaped the direction of the genre happened in the early 90s, right around the same period Davis made his move. And that's where people start connecting dots. You've got a pop-focused executive suddenly stepping into a genre that was still developing and largely unproven. On the surface, it could just be a smart business move. But for those who believe the theory, the timing doesn't feel random at all. It feels aligned. The claim goes even further, suggesting that Clive Davis didn't just attend that alleged meeting, but actually led it, and then almost immediately shifted his focus toward investing in hip-hop. That timing is what fuels the entire theory, because right after that period, he backs Bad Boy Records, which goes on to launch major artists like Craig Mack and Biggie Smalls, names that didn't just succeed, but helped redefine the direction of the genre. So the question becomes, is that just coincidence, or does it line up a little too perfectly with what that anonymous letter described? That's where the speculation builds. The idea is that after that meeting, Davis wasn't just exploring hip-hop, he was actively looking for the right platform to scale it. And according to this perspective, he found it in Sean Combs. Instead of betting on one artist, he backed an entire movement through a label. And once that level of support comes in, everything changes. Hip-hop doesn't stay underground. It becomes structured, funded, and pushed into the mainstream at full force, turning it into a global industry almost overnight. When you step back and look at what was happening in the 1980s leading into that alleged meeting, the timeline starts to feel more deliberate than random. Right in the middle of that shift, NWA emerges and completely changes the tone of hip-hop. They weren't just another group. They brought a raw, aggressive style that stood out immediately. Tracks like Panic Zone and Boys in the Hood started building attention locally, but everything changed when they released Straight Outta Compton. That's when it exploded. They didn't just gain popularity, they became a global force almost overnight, pushing a new image and sound that would end up shaping the direction of the genre for years to come.
That moment didn't just elevate the genre, it redefined it and set the tone for everything that followed.
But when you take a closer look at NWA's rise, that's where things start to raise questions for some people. Because while their image was built around raw street credibility, not every member actually lived that reality. It's been acknowledged by various industry voices over the years that while Eazy-E had real connections to the streets, others like Dr. Dre, Ice Cube, and DJ Yella came from very different backgrounds. Yet they were the ones delivering the message that ended up defining the gangster rap image worldwide. That's where the story takes an interesting turn, because regardless of background, they still managed to shape a global movement. And for some, that raises a bigger question. Was this purely organic success, or was something else helping push it forward behind the scenes? Not long after forming, NWA was signed to Priority Records, and that's where things start to get even more interesting when you look at the bigger picture. Because before that deal, Priority wasn't even known for hip-hop. They weren't building in that space at all. The founders actually came from K-Tel International, a company best known for those As Seen on TV compilation albums, not street music, not underground culture, but commercial, mass-market products. And their first major success under Priority wasn't even rap. It was a novelty project tied to the California Raisins, animated characters performing classic soul tracks. So think about that shift for a second. You go from selling TV compilation albums and cartoon-backed music straight into funding one of the most influential gangster rap groups ever. That kind of pivot isn't small, it's massive, and it happened fast. And that's why people question it, because jumping from novelty music to investing heavily in a raw, unproven genre like gangster rap doesn't look like a gradual evolution. It looks like a calculated move that changed the direction of the industry overnight. Going from novelty records to backing what became the world's most dangerous group is exactly the kind of shift that fuels this entire theory. Because for some, that moment marks the real turning point, where hip-hop stopped evolving naturally and started being shaped with a specific direction in mind. The claim is that NWA wasn't just successful, they were positioned to set a tone that others would follow. According to this perspective, labels like Priority didn't just sign talent, they helped craft the image. The argument is that certain elements, from lyrical direction to public persona, were influenced to fit a specific archetype that would sell and spread. That doesn't mean everything was fabricated, but it suggests the presentation may have been more controlled than people realized. Even Ice Cube has spoken in the past about feeling like he was part of something bigger at the time, raising questions about how much control artists really had during that era.
To ensure certain songs make it through and certain songs don't. No, some records are made by committee, meaning record company guys sit around and tell the artists, this is hot, say that, do this. We're gonna have this guy write the lyrics. We're gonna have that. So the narrative is really kind of, structured and really made into what the record company want the record to be, and what a lot of artists are frustrated with this kind of music making. A lot of people, feel like they're being controlled by the label, how they do it, telling you what songs to sing, what hooks to do, what songs, you can do your song, fine. That's an album cut. But the single is what we all say is the single. Oh, you have, the record company pushing the narrative. This to me is somewhat, some social engineering going on here to make sure those prisons stay full. Now, there's a lot of to connect to make that happen. I'm just giving you a broad example of how people at the top can manipulate what's going on with the people who are bickering and fighting.
By the time the 90s hit, the blueprint was already in place, and the industry was ready to scale everything up. From this perspective, NWA wasn't just a breakthrough group, they were the testing phase for what would dominate the next decade. Now, some people argue this is just music, that it doesn't have real-world impact. But that's where the disagreement starts, because influence doesn't stay contained, it spreads. When a certain lifestyle is constantly promoted, repeated, and rewarded, especially to younger audiences, it doesn't just entertain, it shapes perception. The argument here is that when people grow up idolizing images tied to violence or criminality, that influence can start to affect how they see success, identity, and behavior. And once that message becomes normalized, it's no longer just music, it becomes part of the culture itself. They see these artists getting the money, the attention, the status, everything they want, and that's where the influence really starts to take hold. Because it's not just about listening anymore, it becomes something to chase. Think about how many young people try to model themselves after that image, not realizing the difference between performance and reality. The argument here is that some end up facing real consequences while chasing something that may not have been authentic to begin with. But unlike members of NWA, who some argue were performing a role, figures like Pooh Shiesty are often pointed to as being fully immersed in that lifestyle. And that's where this argument becomes more intense. The claim is that he represents the outcome of growing up in an environment where that image is constantly reinforced and rewarded. From this perspective, the line between music and real life starts to disappear. Instead of the persona staying in the lyrics, it carries over into actions and public identity. And that's what people highlight when they talk about this cycle, the idea that what begins as influence can eventually turn into reality for those who adopt it completely. His history already included serious incidents, a shooting at a club and a robbery in a parking lot, and that alone put him under heavy scrutiny. But it didn't stop there. Just weeks after being released from prison for those charges, he was arrested again in April 2026. That's where everything shifts. This isn't a one-off situation anymore. It's a pattern that keeps repeating. And when you look at it like that, it raises a bigger question about where this path leads, because at some point it stops being about music and starts becoming something much more serious. He's now accused of using force to pressure his own label boss, Gucci Mane, into releasing him from his contract, and that alone shows how far things have escalated. This isn't industry drama, this is something else entirely. And the irony is hard to ignore, because Gucci Mane himself has long been associated with that same image. This is where the argument peaks. Pooh Shiesty gets framed as the full outcome of that archetype, not performing it, but living it. The image, the behavior, the consequences, all of it lines up. Then the focus shifts to the business side. When you look at where the money flows, some point to overlap between major investment firms tied to the music industry and those connected to private prisons. That connection is what fuels the bigger claim, that influence, profit, and outcome may be more linked than people want to admit. The timeline starts to look intentional when you line it all up. You go from novelty-style music and commercial experiments straight into the rise of gangster rap in the late 80s and then into the full-scale expansion of the 90s. That shift wasn't slow, it was sharp, and it changed the direction of the genre completely. Then you bring in Clive Davis backing Bad Boy and pushing hip-hop into the global spotlight. That's when everything scales. The sound, the image, the business model, all of it gets amplified and turned into a dominant force. Fast forward to now, and people point to cases like this as the end result of that trajectory. The claim is simple. When a system rewards a certain image long enough, it eventually produces people who fully embody it. And once that happens, the line between influence and outcome is gone. So now it comes down to you. Do you think that secret meeting actually happened, or is this just a story that's been blown out of proportion over time? Because when you line everything up, the timing, the money, the shifts in the culture, it doesn't feel random. This isn't just about one meeting, it's about a pattern. The way the industry moved, the way certain images were pushed, the way everything scaled so fast, that doesn't happen by accident. And once you start seeing it that way, it changes how you look at everything that came after. Even outside of hip-hop, this idea has been hinted at before. Movies like Josie and the Pussycats literally showed a version of the music industry being used to influence people without them even realizing it. That concept didn't come out of nowhere. The question is simple: coincidence or design? If you made it this far, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video. And let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.